Chapter 5. The unconscious region of mental action. Few men are ever brought to feel the full worth of their own minds, and physicians practically, if not theoretically, undervalue the importance of the mental aspect of disease. The mind is the only principle of motion in the body, and its only life. It is our inward being. All that a man really is belongs to the mental organism. It is the theater of the divine energy, the home of immortal thought, the spring of the aspiration of the infinite. It is the real location of hell and disease, and of heaven and health. All essential interests center in the soul. All that do not center there are circumstantial, transitory, and evanescent. They belong to things that perish. The introduction into mental philosophy of the doctrine of the unconscious, or, as it is usually called, preconscious, mental action is a most important advance in the science of the mind. The notion which has usually been entertained by psychologists is that the acts of the mind are precisely coextensive with the consciousness, and that whatever is done unconsciously, though apparently intelligently, yet springs from some objective source, and not from the mind itself. This doctrine, that the regions of intelligence and of consciousness are coextensive, has of late years been abandoned and come into deserved discredit. Sir William Hamilton many years ago reproduced that most fruitful idea of Leibniz, the doctrine of unconscious thought, and pointed out the fact that there is always going forward more or less energetically in the soul a process of latent thinking. He adopts the doctrine, so prevalent among German psychologists, that the mind exerts energies and is the subject of modification of neither of which it is conscious, and distinguishes 3 degrees of mental latency. Dr. Carpenter, taking a more material view, designated the same phenomena under the term unconscious cerebration. Dr. Laycock has brought them under the general category of the reflex action of the cerebral spinal nerves. But this reflex action takes place with undeviating certainty and with unerring intelligence. When a sensation generates a muscular contraction and expends itself in a given movement, it is still the mind that is the occult cause, for the reason that sensation is not a bodily affection, but a mental phenomenon. The doctrine of the unconscious, or, as it is more properly called, preconscious, mental action has been fully developed in the German systems of psychology, particularly those of Carus and the followers of Herhart, and especially by Emanuel Hermann Fichte in his Anthropology, and his smaller work entitled Philosophical Confessions. So that the idea of the preconscious life of the soul, and of an intelligent mental action beyond the range of the external consciousness, may be considered as fully established in philosophy, and is one that will be fruitful in results. This unconscious mental action, or latent thought and intelligence, is a doctrine of great importance in physiology and mental science. We affirm that the soul has an a priori existence, that it precedes the bodily organism, and forms the body according to its nature and for its use in the external world. What is the nature of this preexistence we do not attempt to decide. It may lie beyond the limits of the human understanding for the present if it is not to be classed among things unknowable. If we affirm with Swedenborg that life is uncreated and uncreatable, then our individual life must perpetually spring from the divine being, and though never absolutely disconnected from its source, yet we come to a distinct individuality in our conception. In this God comes to self-limitation, and the soul enters into time and space, and thus becomes an individual. If it is once admitted that the soul principle has an existence prior to that of the body, then it follows that it may exist after the dissolution of the body. The fact of its preexistence thus becomes the strongest evidence of its immortality. The soul is the architect of the body, and forms it by an unerring intelligence, by a process of unconscious thinking. The whole of the preconscious state of the soul is essentially and specially a process of thinking, without, however, its thought as yet touching the threshold of consciousness. In this simple idea there lies nothing less than a new future for psychology, as also for the question respecting the relation of the soul and body. My philosophy has chiefly aimed at giving a concrete and experimental development to this same idea. When, therefore, in the plastic and physical processes it recognizes an intelligence which develops organic forms in space, and which stands in manifest analogy with the art instincts of animals, and the creative aesthetic faculty in man, we cannot but think that we are only giving back again, truly and pointedly, the actual characteristics which experience presents us. The doctrine of Fichte is that the body is formed, and afterwards all its physiological processes carried on by an unconscious mental action, an instinctive and intelligent thinking. Lai expressly affirms that no organic activity is possible without the cooperation of thought, which thought can unquestionably exist only in the soul. Inasmuch, however, as it precedes sensation, the principle by which consciousness is awakened, it must necessarily remain unconscious. The acts of the morphological and physical impulses are not conceivable without the constant operation of Till's same instinctive power and unconscious thinking. All movements of the bodily organism, all changes in our physical condition, are manifestations of mind. Mind is the only causal agent, the only active principle in the universe and especially in the body. Morel, in his valuable work on mental philosophy on the inductive method, has clearly shown that the so-called vital force, nerve force, and mind force are correlated or mutually influence each other and are interchangeable, the one into the other. This conclusively proves that they are one at their root and are probably only different forms of mental force. We can adopt the expressive language of Schelling that all physical motion, activity, and life effort are only an unconscious thinking, or in the clearer, inspired declaration of Fortledge, that the external functions of the nervous system are only mind becoming visible. On this subject, I.H. Fichte has said, "The structure of the nervous system presents us with a perfect reflex of psychical relations, and that consequently there must be various mental processes corresponding with the different functions which we find to exist in connection with nervous activity." There are two widely different modes of viewing the relation of the cerebral nervous system to the mind. The one, the materialistic view, teaches that mental action is the result of cerebral activity. This theory is adopted more or less fully by Carpenter, Laycock, Muldaly, and Lewis. This materialistic view attained its culmination in Moleschott, who affirms that thought is a secretion of the brain, as the bile is that of the liver. The other, the spiritualistic view, is that the mind has priority of existence, and by its plastic power forms the body and the nervous system as an instrument adapted to its own use, that it can act independently of the brain and of all organic conditions, and can, and does in fact, survive the dissolution of the body. After a patient study of the nature and laws of the human mind, and of its relation to the body, for more than 40 years, I am compelled to adopt the latter hypothesis as explaining more clearly all the mental phenomena. The first theory would greatly shake, if not overturn from their foundation, our comforting assurance and blissful hope of immortality. The religious instinct and consciousness intuitively and spontaneously grasp the latter theory as the only one in harmony with its nature. It is the property of a genuine religious life in the soul that it spontaneously accepts all truth that is fitted to afford it the proper nutriment, and rejects with an involuntary repulsion whatever is not thus adapted to its nature. This it does by a divine instinct, acting independently of the logical reason. The mind is not the result of organization, and consequently dependent upon the body for its existence, but is itself the organizing principle. This unconscious mental action in our bodily organism may be the result of the connection of the individual soul with the universal mind, or the general sphere of life and intelligence in the universe, or something like that which Swedenborg denominates the Maximus Homo, or Gin man. We are parts of this stupendous whole. All individual thought and knowledge spring from an intellect that is common to all, and in which our power of knowing has the ground of its existence. In other words, as there is but one life in the universe, and all the various forms of existence are but manifestations of it, the same is true of thought and knowledge. The theory of a common intellect was earnestly maintained by the Arabian philosopher Averroes, also by Alexander, Themistius, Cajetanus, and Zabarella. The vision in the deity of Malebranche is only a modification of it. Preconscious mental activity in the body is an unconscious or latent thinking, as Leibniz denominated it. In the philosophy of Fichte, life and thought are one and the same. To think is to live, or, more properly, to exist. He says, it is obvious that the phrases thought and life, thoughtlessness and death, mean precisely one and the same thing. Thought is the element of life, and consequently, the absence of thought must be the source of death. The power to think in all men is derived by influx from the Lord. Hence, as Fichte affirms, thought is something of the divine life in man. Pure thought is itself the divine existence. And on the other hand, the divine existence is nothing else than pure thought. It is this that gives to thought a spiritual potency and creative agency, and invests it with such influence over our own condition and that of others, a subject we shall more fully discuss in what follows. Our individual vitality is never disconnected from the universal life. The knowledge of the lowest expression of life constitutes physics, that of the organic, physiology, that of the highest, or spiritual, psychology. The latter may he defined as the science of the life of God in man's soul, physiology as that of the life of God in his body. And as that life is essentially one, psychology and physiology, in their high philosophical idea, are connected as soul and body, and each is an exponent of the other.